In a partially developed neighborhood on the outskirts of Dallas, three friends had rented an apartment together on the 13th floor of a quiet residential complex. The building was still surrounded by construction sites with empty lots and half-finished structures stretching across the area. It often felt isolated, especially at night. Among the three, Ethan worked at a mid-sized IT firm in the city. One weekend, his girlfriend, Sophie, who also worked at the same company, came over to visit. It was their day off, and two of Ethan's co-workers had also dropped by. The group was relaxed, joking around and enjoying their time together. At some point, Ethan casually asked Sophie if she could cook something simple for everyone. She agreed and went into the kitchen. She placed a pan on the stove, added chopped potatoes and spices, and left it to cook on a very low flame. Before leaving, she made sure the heat was minimal so it wouldn't burn. Then she returned to Ethan's bedroom, where the others were gathered, talking and laughing without a care. After a while, a strange, foul smell began to drift into the room. It wasn't just the smell of food burning. It was thicker, harsher, something unsettling. The bedroom door had only been pushed to, not locked. One of the friends stood up immediately and rushed toward it to check what was happening, but just as he reached for the handle, the door suddenly clicked shut on its own. For a moment, everyone froze. It didn't feel like an accident. It felt deliberate, like something had locked them in from the outside. Panic slowly began to rise. They tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. Then, through the narrow gap beneath the door, thin strands of smoke started creeping into the room. Within seconds, it thickened, filling the air with a suffocating haze. The laughter from moments ago had vanished. Now there was only confusion, fear, and helplessness. Later, this incident was described in an email by a coworker named Shivani Patel, who worked with Ethan. She explained that the apartment had been unusually cheap, far below the market rate, even though it was fully furnished. The rent had been barely over $100 per person, which had initially seemed like incredible luck. Ethan and his friends, Ryan and Alex, had all studied engineering together before moving to Dallas. While Ethan and Ryan joined the same IT company, Alex had enrolled in a nearby business school. When they found this apartment at such a low price, they didn't question it much. They assumed it was because the area was still under development. Excited by what they believed was a lucky deal, they moved in without a second thought. None of them realized that the apartment had a past that no one had bothered to tell them about. For the first 2.5 months after moving in, everything in the apartment felt completely normal. The place had already been fully furnished. There was a TV, a refrigerator, speakers, and properly set up bedrooms with beds and clean sheets. It felt like they had hit the jackpot. Their friends visited almost every other day, and the apartment was always filled with laughter, music, and the kind of carefree energy that came with living a bachelor life. One weekend, they were hosting a small party again. Drinks were flowing, music was loud, and the night was going perfectly, until around 10:30 p.m. when they realized they had run out of alcohol. Back then, it wasn't unusual to get more even at late hours if you were willing to pay a little extra under the table. No one wanted the night to end so abruptly. Ethan reassured everyone that it wasn't a problem and said they would go get more. Ryan decided to go with him, saying it wasn't a good idea to head out alone, especially since the area was still quiet and underdeveloped. It was also a particularly cold night. They left the apartment and rode out slowly along the dimly lit service road, heading toward a distant liquor store. Ethan was driving the motorcycle while Ryan sat behind him, urging him to speed up so they wouldn't miss the closing time. As Ethan increased the speed, the road ahead remained mostly empty, but just a few seconds later, something unexpected appeared. Right in the middle of the road, a woman was standing still. She wasn't moving, she wasn't signaling, she was just there. Ethan barely had time to react. Instinctively, he swerved the bike to the left to avoid hitting her, but the sudden turn threw off the balance. Within a split second, the motorcycle skidded and slammed straight into a tree by the roadside. The crash was brutal. Ethan suffered the worst of it. His collarbone was completely shattered, the bone visibly displaced in a disturbing way. Ryan, who had been sitting behind, escaped with a comparatively minor injury, a fracture in his leg. Still painful, but not life-threatening. Lying there in shock and pain, they somehow managed to call their friends. The others rushed to the location, found them injured by the roadside, and immediately took them to the hospital. After surgeries, casts, and several days of treatment, both of them were eventually discharged and brought back home. Once they were back at the apartment, Ethan insisted on what he had seen. He told them there had been a woman standing in the middle of the road, and he had swerved only to save her. But Ryan denied it completely. He said he hadn't seen any woman at all. The others brushed it off quickly, suggesting Ethan must have been drunk and imagined things in that moment. No one took his words seriously, and the topic was dropped just as fast as it had come up. Over the next few months, Ethan remained mostly confined to the apartment, recovering slowly from his injuries. His friends took care of him, helping with daily tasks as he healed bit by bit. On the surface, life seemed to be returning to normal again, but somewhere in the back of Ethan's mind, that image of the woman standing silently on the road refused to fade. That thought kept eating Ethan from the inside. No matter how many times people dismissed it, he was convinced he had seen that woman standing in the middle of the road. It didn't feel like a hallucination, and he knew he hadn't imagined it. Still, every time he tried to bring it up, his friends laughed it off, treating it like a joke or a side effect of the crash. During this time, his girlfriend Sophie stayed close and took care of him as much as she could. Life was slowly stabilizing until everything changed. By March, the COVID-19 lockdown began. None of them had managed to travel back home before restrictions were enforced, so the three decided to stay in the apartment and ride it out together. Sophie lived in the same residential complex with a few of her friends, and some of Ethan's other colleagues also had apartments nearby. They all agreed that sticking close to each other would make things easier during lockdown. With nowhere to go and nothing much to do, they spent almost all their time inside the apartment. Days blurred into nights. At first, it felt manageable, just boredom and routine. But within a week or 10 days, something started to feel off. It wasn't anything visible. No sounds, no shadows, no clear signs, just a strange, heavy presence. The air inside the apartment began to feel different, dense, uncomfortable. The three of them often felt like someone else was there with them, quietly listening to their conversations. It was an unshakable sensation, like being watched without ever seeing who was watching. When the first phase of lockdown eased slightly, their friends and girlfriends started visiting again. Sophie often stayed over, and the apartment slowly became lively once more. To deal with the boredom, they bought a carom board and started playing together, trying to distract themselves from the strange uneasiness. They came up with small ways to pass time, games, late-night chats, random activities, but the feeling inside the apartment never truly went away. And it wasn't just them anymore. Even the friends who visited began to sense it. There was something wrong with the energy of that place, something they couldn't explain. One night, after dinner, all three of them went to their separate rooms to sleep. That night, no one else was staying over. It was just the three of them inside the apartment. Ryan lay quietly on his bed, talking to his girlfriend on the phone. The room was completely dark, and the clock showed around 11:15 p.m. The conversation was casual, almost calming. Then suddenly, he heard a loud, sharp sound from the living room. It was the unmistakable noise of something wooden being flipped over. The carom board. The carom board was large and heavy, so when it hit the floor, the sound echoed sharply through the apartment. Ryan immediately stepped out of his room and walked into the living area. Within seconds, Ethan and Alex also rushed out of their rooms, drawn by the noise. Ryan looked at them, confused, and asked why they had come out. He had assumed one of them was in the living room playing and had accidentally knocked the board over, but the moment he said that, all three of them fell silent. They slowly realized that none of them had been outside. A strange tension filled the air as they exchanged uneasy glances. Alex tried to brush it off, suggesting that maybe the board had been placed too close to the edge of the table and had simply fallen on its own. It sounded like the only logical explanation, so they lifted it back up and placed it properly. After that, each of them returned to their rooms, trying to ignore the uneasiness creeping in. Ryan got back on his call with his girlfriend and casually mentioned that the carom board had somehow fallen in the living room. Nearly 10 to 12 minutes passed as they talked. Then it happened again. From the living room, he heard the sound of footsteps. Not normal footsteps. These were fast, uneven, almost frantic. It sounded like someone barefoot was running from one end of the hall to the other. Ryan froze. His voice dropped as he told his girlfriend he would call her back, then immediately dialed Alex, who was in the next room. Alex picked up almost instantly, his breathing already heavy, as if he had been panicking too. Ryan asked if he could hear it. Alex said yes. They quickly added Ethan to the call. From his room, Ethan confirmed he could hear the same thing, the running, back and forth across the hall. None of them had the courage to step outside their rooms. It felt as if something was moving freely just beyond their doors. For several long minutes, they stayed on the call together, telling each other not to disconnect, not to open their doors under any circumstances. Their fear had completely taken over. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the sound stopped. Silence returned. After waiting a while, they slowly opened their doors and stepped out one by one, carefully checking the living room. Nothing was there. Everything looked normal, but none of them felt normal anymore. That night, they decided not to sleep separately. All three of them gathered in Ethan's room and stayed there together until morning, too afraid to be alone. The next day, around noon, they were in the kitchen preparing food. The apartment felt quieter than usual, but they tried to focus on normal things. Suddenly, from the living room, the TV turned on by itself. The sound came out of nowhere, making all of them freeze in place. Alex looked at Ryan and asked if he had turned it on. Ryan immediately denied it, saying he had been in the kitchen the entire time. Ethan stood there watching both of them, his face tense with fear. He said softly that something wasn't right anymore, that this couldn't just happen on its own. Alex tried to stay calm and told him not to overthink it. He walked to the living room and turned the TV off, assuming maybe it had been left on standby or something similar. Then they went back to cooking, pretending everything was fine. But deep down, all three of them knew something in that apartment had started to reveal itself. By evening, they tried to distract themselves with some office work, pretending everything was under control. After dinner, they once again went back to their separate rooms to sleep. Even after everything that had happened the previous night, they chose privacy over safety. Each of them wanted their own space, mostly to talk to their girlfriends without interruption. That night, Alex told his girlfriend around 10:30 p.m. that he wasn't feeling well and wanted to sleep early. He ended the call, put his phone aside, and lay down quietly. Sometime later, just as he was drifting into sleep, he heard a faint knocking sound. It was coming from the balcony. At first, he ignored it, thinking it might be something random, maybe the wind or a loose object. But the knocking didn't stop. It grew more frequent, more deliberate. His eyes snapped open. A sudden realization hit him. He was on the 13th floor, the top floor of the building. There was no way anyone could be standing outside his balcony. Slowly, he sat up on his bed, staring toward the dark outline of the balcony door. As he focused on it, the pattern of the knocking changed. Earlier, it had been continuous. Now, it came in intervals. 2 or 3 knocks every few seconds, as if something was trying to get his attention, patiently. Fear tightened around his chest. He decided he wouldn't stay there any longer. He thought about going to Ryan's room instead. Gathering what little courage he had, he stepped off the bed and walked toward the door. But just as he reached out, he froze. It felt like something was standing right in front of him. He couldn't see anything, but there was an unmistakable presence blocking his way. His hand stopped midair, unable to move forward. A heavy pressure built up on his chest, making it hard to breathe. Before he could react, something invisible yanked him backward. He was thrown onto the bed. The impact knocked the air out of him. At that moment, he knew this wasn't normal. This wasn't something he could explain. Trembling, he pulled the blanket over himself, covering his entire body, as if hiding would somehow make it go away. His mind raced, but he didn't dare move, didn't dare look. He started silently praying, repeating whatever he could remember, just to get through the night. He didn't call his friends, he didn't make a sound. He just lay there, frozen in fear, waiting for morning. And somehow, the night passed. The next morning, as soon as he saw Ethan and Ryan, he told them everything that had happened. His voice was still shaky, his face pale. Ethan listened quietly, then said that he had warned them before, that something was wrong with that apartment. He reminded them of the night of the accident, of the woman he had seen standing in the middle of the road. The one no one else had seen. The one they had all dismissed. Now, for the first time, no one laughed. Alex sighed and said there wasn't much they could do right now. It was the middle of lockdown, and finding another place on rent at that time was nearly impossible. He suggested they stay for as long as they could manage and leave the apartment the moment things opened up again. Reluctantly, everyone agreed. About 4 days after that incident, Sophie came over to the apartment again. A few of Ethan's coworkers also joined them that evening. Trying to bring back some normalcy, Ethan casually asked Sophie to cook something for everyone, telling her she made great potato dishes. The plan was simple. She would cook, and they would have it with rice together. Sophie agreed and went into the kitchen. She placed a pan on the stove, added potatoes and spices, and kept the flame very low before heading back to Ethan's room, where everyone else was sitting and talking. The mood felt normal again, almost like before, but only for a while. After some time, a strong, unpleasant burning smell began to spread outside the room. It wasn't just food, it smelled harsher, like something had gone seriously wrong. One of Ethan's friends immediately got up and rushed to open the bedroom door, but just as he reached it, the door locked itself from the outside. For a second, no one understood what had just happened. Then the panic hit. Smoke started seeping into the room through the narrow gap under the door, slowly at first, then thicker, filling the air with a suffocating heaviness. Everyone began coughing, shouting, banging on the door, trying to force it open, but it wouldn't move. In the chaos, Ethan suddenly remembered that Alex was in his own room. He immediately called him, but the call didn't connect. Alex was already on another call. At that moment, Alex had been standing in his balcony, talking to his family. He ignored Ethan's incoming calls, assuming it wasn't urgent. Inside the locked room, the situation was getting worse. The smoke was increasing, and they were now desperately banging on the door, shouting for help. After a while, Alex faintly heard the noise from inside the apartment. It sounded like someone was hitting something repeatedly. Confused, he ended his call and rushed inside. As he moved toward Ethan's room, he noticed thick smoke coming out of the kitchen. His heart dropped. He quickly unlocked the bedroom door from the outside and let everyone out. They rushed out, coughing and disoriented. Alex asked what had happened and whether something had caught fire in the kitchen. Without wasting a second, Sophie ran straight into the kitchen, and what she saw made her freeze. The pan she had left on low heat was completely black, burnt beyond recognition, but there were no potatoes, no spices, nothing. Inside, it was only a layer of fine, dark ash, as if everything that had been there had been completely reduced to dust. Next to the stove, a cleaning cloth had caught fire as well, its edges still smoldering. Together, they quickly managed to control the situation and put everything out before it could spread further. After that, no one said much. They all gathered silently in the living room, trying to process what had just happened. Ryan had been inside the room with Ethan the whole time, and for the first time, no one tried to explain it away. Sitting together in the living room, Alex finally opened up and told everyone about everything they had experienced over the past few days. The sounds, the presence, the incident in his room, all of it. The atmosphere turned serious. One of Ethan's coworkers suggested that they should get the place checked by someone experienced in dealing with such things, maybe a priest or a spiritual expert. He admitted that even he had started feeling a strange heaviness every time he visited the apartment. Sophie added something even more unsettling. She pointed out that when she had left the kitchen earlier, the stove flame had been set to the lowest level. But when she returned, it was burning at full intensity. She questioned how that could have happened when no one had gone near the kitchen. That detail made everyone fall silent. It suggested that something else had been there with them. She urged them to either leave the apartment as soon as possible or seriously consider getting help. Everyone agreed, but the same problem remained. Finding another place during lockdown was nearly impossible. Sophie offered to check in her own building and see if any apartment was available so they could shift there if something opened up. After that discussion, they tried to act normal again. They went back into the kitchen, cooked together, ate their meal, and eventually settled down for the night. But from that day onward, things only got worse. The frequency of incidents increased. Alex would suddenly fall sick without any clear reason. Ryan would feel like he had been pushed while walking, stumbling as if someone had shoved him from behind. Ethan, on the other hand, would often lie on his bed, staring blankly at the ceiling fan for long periods, lost in thought, almost disconnected. The entire apartment started to feel cursed. As days passed, the sounds in the living room became more disturbing. It wasn't just footsteps anymore. Now, along with the running, they began to hear faint screams. Sometimes it sounded like a woman crying softly. Other times the crying turned into painful, distorted wails, echoing through the hall. Whenever they gathered the courage to open their doors and check, there was never anyone there. Nothing, just silence. By July, the situation had started affecting their personal lives as well. Whenever Sophie came over, she and Ethan would end up arguing. What started as small disagreements slowly turned into intense, frequent fights. Alex and Ryan often found themselves trying to calm things down, stepping in between them. But over time, even they grew tired. The arguments became so constant and exhausting that Alex and Ryan began distancing themselves from Ethan, avoiding getting involved altogether. Then one evening, around 7:30 p.m., Sophie was at the apartment again. She and Ethan were lying in his room. At some point, Ethan drifted into a sudden, vivid dream. In that dream, he saw himself arguing with Sophie, violently, uncontrollably. The anger felt real, overwhelming. Then, in a burst of rage, he picked up a large stone, and without hesitation, he struck her again and again and again. He kept hitting her face with it repeatedly until it was completely unrecognizable. The dream felt disturbingly real. A few moments later in that dream, Sophie began struggling for breath, and then suddenly went still. She was dead. Before Ethan could even process it, the scene shifted. He saw himself standing under the ceiling fan, tying a rope around his neck, and then he hanged himself. That was the moment it hit him. Ethan jolted awake, gasping, his heart pounding violently in his chest. For a second, he just sat there, trying to catch his breath. Then relief washed over him. It had only been a dream, but something didn't feel right. He turned and saw Sophie lying beside him, asleep. Even then, the fear didn't go away. He later described that it hadn't felt like a normal dream at all. It had felt real, as if he had actually done those things, not just imagined them. The emotions, the actions, everything had felt too vivid. Panicking, he quickly shook Sophie awake, checking if she was okay. She woke up confused, asking what had happened and why he was acting like that. Ethan told her everything, the dream, every detail. As she listened, her expression changed. She had already been feeling that something was wrong in that apartment, but now she was certain. She told him that the constant fights between them. This time, when they approached the security guard and asked again, he hesitated just like before. At first, he tried to give the same rehearsed answer, that nothing was wrong with the apartment. But they didn't let it go. They pressed him, insisting that they had already moved out and just wanted to know the truth. After a long pause, the guard finally gave in. He told them that the apartment had once belonged to a married couple. Things between them had not been normal. According to what he had heard, the husband had discovered that his wife was involved with another man, and not just that, she had secretly married him while still living with her husband. At the same time, the wife had grown suspicious that her husband was having an affair with her own sister. The situation spiraled quickly. Their arguments became frequent, loud, and increasingly violent. It reached a point where the woman had called her brother and told him that things were getting out of control. She feared for her life. She had even warned him that if he ever called and she didn't answer, he should come to the apartment immediately and check on her. The next day, during dinner, another argument broke out. This time, it went too far. The husband had been drinking. The fight escalated beyond control, and in a moment of rage, he grabbed a heavy stone pestle from the kitchen, the kind used for grinding, and attacked her. He struck her face with it, again and again. The assault was brutal and relentless, happening right there in the living room. Eventually, she collapsed and died. Sometime after that, the husband went into the master bedroom and ended his own life by hanging himself from the ceiling fan. The guard said that during the fight, The neighbors from the opposite apartment had heard everything. The shouting had been so intense that they kept banging on the door, begging them to stop. They had sensed that something terrible was about to happen, and it did. When the door was never opened, the neighbors eventually called the police. The authorities broke in, conducted their investigation, and found the woman's lifeless body in the living room and the husband hanging in the bedroom. After the incident, the husband's sister took control of the apartment, and she was the same landlord who had rented the place to them. Everything inside had been left almost untouched. The same furniture, the same beds, even the same sheets. As the guard finished, Ethan stood there in complete shock, because what he had just heard was exactly what he had seen in his dream. Every detail, the violence, the stone, the death, even the hanging. It wasn't just similar, it was the same. Later, they even found an old report about the case published on an online news site, confirming that the incident had actually happened. And in that moment, everything they had experienced in that apartment, the sounds, the presence, the fear, the dreams, finally started to make sense. But by then, they were already lucky to have made it out. Ethan, Ryan, and Alex walked away from that 13th floor apartment, but they didn't walk away unchanged. Some memories are too heavy to leave behind. Stories like Ethan's remind us that energy doesn't just vanish. Sometimes it gets trapped within the very four walls we call home. The fact that the landlord left the furniture, the beds, and even the sheets untouched suggests that the past was never meant to be forgotten. We wish you nothing but peace, health, and a sense of security in your own homes. We'll be back soon with another story that challenges the boundaries of reality.